So before we get started, we get this asked a lot to us, so just to get out of the way, we are brothers, but we're not twins. So I'm 18.
And I'm 15.
And today we're going to be talking to you guys about how to make anything out of paper. Welcome to the intriguing, magnificent, and highly creative world of origami. Now, I bet some of you are really interested, or maybe you've even tried origami before. But for one reason or another, you're thinking, I could never do that, or I tried but I just failed. Don't worry, we've both been there before. We all know the feeling when you finally create an origami, and you know what it's supposed to be, but it didn't quite turn out like how you thought it would. For example, here is one of our first angels we made. Here's another one of our beginning elephants. And of course, possibly the most famous origami of all time, the rock. So, John and I used to live in Colorado, and there I had one very close friend. We were both 6-year-old boys and highly competitive. One day, my friend showed me something I'd never seen before. A crane made out of a single sheet of paper. This was my first introduction to origami, and the competition was on. Soon, we were both scrambling to search the internet, seeing who could make the more complex model. Even after I moved to California, we would still mail each other our best origami to continue the competition. Through this process, I slowly became more and more interested and proficient in origami.
So during this time that he was floating, I started when I was 7. And I learned using the library or by checking out books. And it wasn't until I came across a book written by Robert J. Lang, who is one of the world's leading masters of origami, that I really became interested or passionate to learn how to learn. His works were so realistic and complex, it basically opened a whole new world to me. And so from there, I just basically dropped all my other books and only began to check out books written by him so I could learn his method and his style. And so 4 years later, I began to have design challenges with Brennen. We would give each other a certain amount of time to create the best design we could. But since we're not the best at designing, these challenges usually ended in the both of us just laughing. But it was through this that we became more and more interested in the idea of design. And this actually led us both, despite the different ways that we've got to origami, to the same question. How can we create anything out of paper? Is this even possible? Well, it turns out there is a way.
Whenever you're creating anything for the first time, let's say you're baking a cake, you want to understand the basics or like the ingredients you have before you move on to the actual process, right? So in origami, there are actually 3 basic principles all origami must follow. To spare you all the advanced trigonometry lesson I know you are all looking forward to, we're just going to give you a general overview of the concepts. Every time you fold a piece of paper, you make a crease. Since each origami is just a series of different folds, every origami also has a unique set of creases, also known as a crease pattern. This can be seen by unfolding any origami. So here we've unfolded our crane, and you can see its crease pattern. So the first basic origami principle is Kawasaki's theorem. And this states that at any vertex in the crease pattern, so in this example, we'll take our bird base and we'll just look at the center vertex. And we see that if you number the angles sequentially, all the even numbered angles add up to 180 degrees, as do the odd. So in our example here, if you notice the shaded areas are the even angles, 2, 4, 6, and 8, and they equal 180 degrees, the sum of them. So now there's one more thing we need to know, and that is that there are 2 main types of folds in origami. If you fold a piece of paper downwards, you make a mountain fold, because this makes a mini mountain. If you fold a piece of paper upwards, you make a valley fold, because it makes a mini valley. On a crease pattern, valley folds are denoted as dashed lines, but mountain folds are denoted as dashed and dotted lines. So with this in mind, the second basic principle in origami is Maekawa's theorem. And this simply states that at any vertex, again in the crease pattern, the number of valley folds and mountain folds always differ by 2. So in our example here, you see that there are 5 red lines. Those are the valley folds. But there are only 3 blue lines. Those are the mountain folds, if you're looking at the center vertex. So 5 minus 3 is 2. They always differ by 2. So this may not seem too important, but it's actually crucial to origami because it allows all our origami models to fold flat. One cool result of this theorem is the principle of two-colorability. All it really means is that you can color any origami crease pattern. So in this example, we have our bird base. You can color it with only using 2 colors where none of the 2 areas that are touching each other have the same color. There's one more principle, and that is that a sheet can never penetrate a fold. And all that really means is you can't go punching holes into your paper to make origami.
So, we need to know one thing before we actually get into the method, and that is what a flap is. A flap is simply just the long parts or pointy structures of a finished origami. So, as you can see, the head, the wings, the body, and the tail, those are all flaps. So, the first step is to think of what you guys want to make. For example, in this TED Talk, I want to make a bird or a crane. Once you have your subject or what you want to make, it's time to draw a basic stick figure of it. So as you can see in the stick figure of the crane, I simply just drew the generic features or the basic parts, so the head, the wings, the tail, and the body. These will eventually become the flaps of your model. Now it's time to turn that stick figure into a base. Now a base is basically the paper version of your stick figure. And we can do this simply by first representing the stick figure by circles. We do this because on the crease pattern, flaps are represented by circles. So as you can see in the drawing, we simply just drew circles over the crane stick figure to represent them. So now basically the circles are the stick figure. And so if we take away the stick figure, all we did was really turn the wings into circles, the head into circles, the body into circles, and then of course to the proportionally correct size. So the body is going to be smaller than the head. So now it's time to put these circles into a square, and that will be your piece of paper. So if you take note of the red dots, they just became the borders of the square. And so really, we just pack these circles into the square. And as you probably guessed, this process is known as circle packing. So once we're done with this, it's time to make a crease pattern out of it. We can do so by just connecting the dots or the circles with creases and then adding any additional creases to allow your model to flatten. And because the crease pattern is simply just all the lines or creases needed to make your model, we can simply fold on the lines of our crease pattern. And this will create our base. So once we have our base, it's time for the funnest, most artistic part of the whole process. It's what I like to call sculpting. Sculpting is the art of turning the flaps of your base into the head, wings, arms, claws, antennas, anything your model requires. It's like going from a base like this to the actual model. So that's it. That's the entire process used to design anything you want.
So just on a side note, this isn't the only method of creating origami. As you progress further into origami, everybody develops their own style. There isn't one right way. So don't take these concepts as strict rules you must follow to make origami, but more as just a general guideline and framework for you to develop your own style. Secondly, going from the stick figure to the base is one of the most difficult parts in the origami design process. So if you're just starting out, we highly recommend you use a base that has already been designed. You can find these online like we did, and they tell you exactly how to fold it, and it'll get you off to a great running start. That's the entire origami process, but the real question here is, does this really work? Can we really create anything out of paper using this method? For example, do you guys think we can create this stag beetle? Well, it turns out Robert J. Lang did create this stag beetle using the exact same method we just described to you guys right now. He first thought of his subject. He then drew a stick figure of it, used circle packing to turn that stick figure into a crease pattern, folded on the lines of his crease pattern to create his base, and finally sculpted that base into his model. And the final result looks surprisingly similar to the real thing. This thing even has tiny origami eyes.
Now, I know what some of you are probably thinking. Well, of course, one of the world's leading origami masters could do something like this, but I could never do anything like that. Well, to tell you the truth, that's exactly how I felt. 2 years ago, I had this idea for a beetle, but I didn't know anything about designing, and I didn't even know where to start. Most of what I made came from books or on the internet, and so the thought of coming up with an advanced beetle, it seemed impossible. And then I started to think to myself, there's more than enough origami beetles in the world, and there's definitely enough books that I could make origami for the rest of my life. Why did I even want to do this? And then it hit me. I created tons and tons of origamis. I've checked out a lot of books at my local libraries. I've even talked to Robert J. Lang himself for origami advice. But none of them came from me. None of them were my own creations. None of them were mine. From that moment forward, I determined that I would have my very own beetle, no matter how long it took. So I scrambled together and started to work out a base for my beetle. And then after that, I worked on a different aspect of the beetle each month. Some months, the aspects would turn out pretty good, but other months, not so much. In these months, I was very, very tempted to just give up out of frustration or quit. I hardly realized that 9 months had gone by when the process was finally over. I had my very own origami beetle. I thought it was crazy that this beetle started from just a piece of paper over 3 feet by 3 feet. And it took 2 weeks to fold, and there was over 250 different folds in it, but eventually folded down into something that could fit in the palm of my hand. I briefly heard about the international competition for youth origamists around the world, and I decided, hey, that would be fun if I sent my beetle in. 2 months later, the results came back that the beetle had received one of the winning spots, and that it would soon be on a traveling exhibition around the nation for 3 years.
So, in summary, here are a few slides we brought to show you our journey through the world of origami. Like everybody, we all just start out basic. Here are some basic seals we made when we were starting out. After that, you get really motivated and inspired. You're like, this is the best thing ever, right? Here is an example of an origami panda. It's a little more advanced. With all things, at some point there's a learning curve. And at some point in origami, when you're trying to make the next advanced thing, it just doesn't turn out that well. This is supposed to be a purple Atlantic sea urchin. And at this point, it can be very tempting to give up. But as my brother always likes to tell me, quitters always lose, but winners never quit. So, if you just keep trying and you keep working at it, you actually find that with time you can make something even more advanced. Like here is a guy playing a cello that's all one piece of paper. And after that, maybe you'll experiment with some of the different styles of origami. Here's an example of a modular origami we've made. It's a transforming ninja star, which means it can turn from all orange to all blue. Before you even know it, you'll be able to create the origami of your dreams. And for us as young boys, this was always a massive, towering, fire-breathing dragon. As you can see, John and I have had a lot of successes, but also a lot of failures. And through this, origami has taught us 3 things we would like to share with you today. First of all, almost accidentally, we've actually become pretty good at math, which hopefully by the end of this talk, maybe you've had a little taste of that as well. Secondly, there's no feeling that compares to working and working really hard at something, finishing it, and being proud of what you accomplished. Lastly, and maybe most importantly, is to persevere. John and I have made a lot of rocks in our time in origami. In fact, we each have a box like this in our rooms, and it's really heavy because it contains all our origami rocks. Okay, it's not that heavy, but the idea is that every time we make a failure, we just throw it in the box. And if you look at our garage, we have a lot of these boxes. We keep them around just in case we need a good laugh some days. The idea is that we learn to persevere. Persevere through all life's challenges where you are able to go from a rock to the massive origami of your imagination. So remember this. When life throws you rocks, make origami. Thanks.